Your mother did not cry when you left. She handed you your father's axe. She looked you straight in the eyes and she said 4 words that you will carry for the rest of your life. Come back with something. Not come back safe, not come back alive. Come back with something. Because in the Viking world, coming home empty-handed was its own kind of death. Not a physical death, a social one. The slow, quiet shame of a man who sat still while the world moved without him. The Vikings have been called barbarians for over 1,000 years, brutal, godless, bloodthirsty destroyers of civilization. And here is what nobody tells you about that. They were also the first Europeans to reach North America. They established trade routes that stretched from the frozen Arctic to the markets of Baghdad. They built legal systems so fair that modern historians still study them. They wrote poetry so complex and beautiful that scholars spend entire careers trying to fully understand it. They were not barbarians. They were complicated, dangerous, brilliant. And they built a world with a structure, with ranks, with rules, with a code of honor as demanding as anything you have encountered on this channel. This is your life, as every rank in the Viking world. Rank 1, Thrall. You start at the bottom, because the Viking world was not equal, and the truth matters more than a comfortable story. The Thrall was a slave, captured in a raid, bought at a market, or born into servitude to parents who were already thralls. You had no legal standing, no right to refuse work, no right to leave, no right to speak in the assembly that decided the rules everyone else lived by. The work was endless and unglamorous, cutting peat for fuel, feeding animals before the rest of the household woke up, carrying water, cleaning, building, repairing, everything the free members of the household considered beneath them. Yet here is the thing that most people do not know about the Viking thrall. You could earn your way out. A thrall who served with loyalty, who showed skill beyond what was expected, who made themselves genuinely valuable to the household, they could be granted freedom, as a reward, as a deathbed gift from an owner who felt something close to gratitude, or by saving enough from small personal earnings to buy their own freedom outright. The freed thrall became what they called a leysingi, a freed person. The status carried limitations. You owed loyalty to the family who freed you for the rest of your life, but you could own property now. You could speak at the thing. You could work for wages and build something that was actually yours. The Viking world was brutal and hierarchical, but it was also more fluid than almost any other society of its time. The hierarchy was real. It was not unbreakable. What were you willing to do to move through it? That question never stopped being relevant, no matter how high you eventually climbed. Rank 2, Karl. Most Vikings were Karls, free farmers, craftsmen, fishermen, the ordinary people who formed the backbone of Norse society. You owned your land or had the right to work it. You paid taxes to your chieftain. You owned weapons, and you had a right that very few people anywhere in the medieval world possessed. You had a vote. The thing was the Viking assembly, a gathering of all free men in a region where laws were debated, disputes were settled, and decisions were made. Everyone had the right to speak. Everyone had the right to be heard. The laws were not handed down by a king from a palace far away. They were argued and agreed upon by the community that actually had to live under them. This happened in the 9th century in Scandinavia, hundreds of years before the idea of ordinary people having a say in their own governance became accepted anywhere else in Europe. Let that land for a second. Your daily life as a Karl moved with the seasons, spring planting and summer fishing, autumn harvest and winter survival. The farm demanded everything from every person in the household: children, elders, men, women, all of it. But the Karl was also a warrior when the call came. When a chieftain organized a raid, or a Jarl called his people to arms, the Karl went. Not as a professional soldier, as a free man fulfilling his obligation to the community that protected his land and his family. He might return with nothing. He might return with enough silver to change his children's lives forever. In that gap, that terrifying, intoxicating uncertainty, was not a flaw in the Viking system. It was the whole engine of it. Rank 3, Huscarl. Some men went on one raid and never came back to farming. Not because they died, because they discovered something out there on the gray water and the hostile shore that they could not unfind. The Huscarl was a professional warrior, a man who had joined a chieftain's personal household guard and dedicated his life entirely to war. He ate at his lord's table. He slept under his lord's roof. He trained every single day with men who had made the same choice, who had the same fire, who understood without needing to explain it what drove them here. The bond between a Huscarl and his lord was not simply employment. It was something older and more binding than that. The Huscarl swore loyalty, genuine, total loyalty, and the lord swore to provide, to share every gain, to stand beside his warriors in the shield wall, rather than behind them. That last part mattered more than anything else. A Viking lord who fought from safety while his Huscarls died at the front lost everything. Not just the battle, his people, his reputation, his claim to the loyalty he needed to survive. The entire Viking system of power was built on the visible willingness of leaders to share the risk they asked of others. Training for the Huscarl was relentless and physical in ways that shaped the body permanently. Shield wall drills until 60 men moved as a single organism. Axe and sword work repeated until the hands knew what to do without asking the brain. Cold water endurance that built a tolerance for the conditions of North Sea raiding that would kill a man in minutes. But here is what separated the Huscarl from simply being a dangerous person with weapons. Discipline. The Huscarl could be unleashed, but he could also be recalled. He followed orders even when his blood was up. He held the shield wall even when everything in him wanted to charge. He understood that the difference between a warrior and a berserker was the ability to choose when the violence happened. Most of the time. Rank 4, Berserker. We need to slow down here, because this rank is unlike anything else in human military history. The Berserker. The word itself has survived over 1,000 years into modern language. We still say someone goes berserk when they lose all control. But the original berserkers were not simply men who lost control. They were something far more deliberately terrifying than that. They were warriors who had trained, or who were selected because of who they naturally were, to enter a specific altered state of consciousness before and during battle. Ancient Norse sources describe them as immune to pain, capable of fighting through wounds that would drop any other warrior, moving through a battlefield with a quality of presence so intensely dangerous that enemy lines sometimes simply broke at the sight of them without a blow being exchanged. How? Nobody agrees. Some historians point to specific plants and mushrooms consumed in pre-battle rituals. Some point to extreme fasting and the altered brain chemistry it produces. Some point to a genuine psychological state, documented now by modern neuroscience, where trained individuals can suppress pain signals and enter a kind of total physical performance that ordinary consciousness cannot access. What we know for certain is this: they were real. They were feared, even by the people on their own side. and no leader who had access to berserkers would choose to go into a serious battle without them. But here is the detail that changes how you think about them entirely. Between battles, berserkers were often described as withdrawn, quiet, sometimes deeply melancholy. The ancient sagas talk about them sitting apart from the group, staring into nothing, difficult to reach. Think about what that actually means for a moment. Inside this person is a version of themselves so dangerous that entire armies fear it, and they carry that version everywhere, every day, in peacetime and in winter and at the dinner table. They cannot put it down. They cannot leave it somewhere safe. It is simply part of them. The berserker was not a role anyone would envy. They were useful, they were feared, and they were profoundly alone, in a way that the sagas hint at, but never quite say directly. Rank 5. Jarl. You have become someone worth following, not because of your bloodline, not because of an inherited title, because of what you actually did, the raids you planned and led successfully, the wealth you generated, and, this part is not optional, the wealth you distributed back to the people who helped you earn it. This is the thing about Viking power that most people do not understand. You could not simply be a Jarl, you had to keep earning it. A Jarl who stopped winning stopped attracting followers. A Jarl who won but kept the silver for himself woke up one season to find his hall empty and his warriors pledged to someone more generous. A Jarl who made bad decisions that got people killed lost the respect that was the only real foundation of their authority. Viking power was earned continuously, or it was lost. There was no inheritance that could protect you from that truth. Every single season, you had to prove again that following you was the right choice. The Jarl's Hall was the center of everything. The long Norse winters that could last half a year were survived there together, eating, arguing, sleeping, planning, listening to the skalds perform the great oral sagas that carried the history and mythology of the Viking world from one generation to the next. The skald was not entertainment. The skald was memory. The skald was immortality. Because in the Viking world, the dead were not gone as long as their story was still being told. The saga was the form of eternal life they actually believed in. Not paradise, not reincarnation. Being remembered. Having done something so significant, so worth singing about, that people were still telling it after you were gone. As Jarl, you understood this in your bones. Every decision you made, every raid you led, every alliance you forged, every enemy you defeated, every man you stood beside in the shield wall was either building your saga or diminishing it. And somewhere in the hall, the skald was watching, taking note, deciding what was worth singing and what was not. That awareness never left you. It was the last thought before sleep and the first thought at dawn. Make it worth singing. From a thrall with no name and no rights, to the lord of a hall whose story the skalds thought worth singing. That was your life in the Viking world. And I want to leave you with the one thing about the Vikings that I think gets lost in every movie and every TV show and every textbook that has ever tried to capture them. They were not trying to destroy the world. They were trying to matter in it. The raiding, the exploring, the trading, the poetry, the legal assemblies, the sagas, all of it was driven by one deep human need that the Viking culture simply refused to suppress or apologize for. The need to be remembered. A Viking who lived quietly and died peacefully and left nothing behind was not seen as fortunate. They were seen as someone who had been given the gift of life and had not done anything meaningful with it. You might disagree with that. The communities they raided certainly did. The violence was real and the suffering was real, and none of that should be minimized. But the drive itself, the refusal to let life pass without leaving a mark, is something that I think most of us understand better than we might want to admit. Which rank would you have been? The Thrall who clawed their way upward through sheer persistence? The Karl who farmed in peace but fought when it mattered? The Huscarl who chose the shield wall as their home? The Berserker carrying something frightening in absolute solitude? Or the Jarl who built something the skalds thought worth singing? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one.